Hey, how's everyone doing? My name's Madison. I'm stepping in for Preeti today to host a debate for True Story on if Bitcoin will become the next world reserve currency. So with me, I have David Gerard, whose Twitter handle is @DavidGerard,
Never mind.
and he is the author of The Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, in addition to many other books.
Excellent.
Very well-known writer within the space. I also have Vortex, whose Twitter handle is @TheOneVortex, who's both an engineer, influencer, and general product specialist within the crypto space. So let's take it to you guys. So let's start out with you, Vortex. Do you think that Bitcoin will become the next world reserve currency?
Yeah, hopefully we can continue live this time. Having a little bit of technical difficulties, guys, so just apologies about that. But yeah, let's go ahead and try this one more time. Really, I'll just start with my opening statement. And basically, want to say, guys, look, we are really on the cusp of the world's largest wealth transfer. The first decade of Bitcoin really was the experiment. The second decade is where Bitcoin really starts to compete on the global stage. Because look, guys, Bitcoin is triple entry bookkeeping. It is the soundest, hardest money with its cap supply. The current system that we have right now, guys, is burning, and the losses are going to have to be realized by somebody. So I believe that people will flock to the most accessible, reliable money, and that's Bitcoin. And Bitcoin itself really is no one's liability. It has no counterparty risk. It allows you to obtain monetary sovereignty, and really is the best, most advanced form of money we've ever had. So, and think about this, only 10 years in, we're already discussing it as a safe haven and a world currency reserve, because Bitcoin has been the best performing asset 8 out of the last 10 years. And at this point, it is really financially irresponsible for money managers to not be exposed to this asset. I mean, listen, guys, we are literally using the fundamental commodity of the universe to fight thermodynamically secure value via mining and this proof of work consensus mechanism. So make no mistake, guys, we are here to steal fire from the gods and use it to build something better, because we are sick of the endless wars propped up and made possible by the reckless monetary decisions being made by governments and central banks. So look, guys, we're going to do this or we're going to die trying.
Awesome. So, David, what do you think about that? Will Bitcoin become the world's reserve currency?
No. So everything Vortex says, there is stuff that is basically crypto jargon term usages of words, and completely sincere, but that doesn't speak to any of the other 7 billion people who are going to have to want some say in this. So far, what makes a reserve currency? It becomes it's money that people can more or less trust the value of. The trouble is that the Austrian economics paradigm, which Bitcoin does its own version of, a bit of variance from conventional Austrianism, doesn't actually capture that, how it works. Soundness of money doesn't come, let me start again. Having a stable currency does not engender social stability. It's social stability that engenders soundness of currency. That could be gold, it could be pure fiat, it could be some other backing, but the social stability has to come first before people trust the money. Look at the history of reserves. The gold standard of the 19th century, which was basically pound sterling backed by gold and assisted by the banks of Central Europe, is often held as the halcyon time that the gold standard people of today want to get back to. That wasn't because of the gold. The gold economy worked because of the stability. It was very managed by the central banks of Europe. So then there was World War I, and what happened was the money destabilized, and the gold standard didn't work anymore, because 4 great empires had immediately broken up in the wake of World War I: the German Empire, Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire. Austria-Hungary and Ottoman basically fell over. Russia became the Soviet Union and wasn't so connected to the rest of the world economy for a while. They tried to stabilize the gold standard through the 20s, and it didn't work. And so we got the Great Depression. Countries left the Great Depression as they left the gold standard. So we came to the Bretton Woods Agreement, but increasingly it was one of those problems with 2-layer systems, where you have a layer 1, which is supposedly the backing, and a layer 2 where all the economic action happens. Layer 1 was eventually a millstone upon layer 2, a dead weight. This is why in the time since we went off the gold standard, we've had one recession that was really bad, the 2008 recession. The 2008 financial crisis was only about as bad as the sort of recessions that happened every 5 to 10 years under the supposedly halcyon gold standard. So the essential theory is backwards. You don't get gold standard, then social stability. You get social stability, then money that people trust. You have to get the direction of causation correct there. So to make Bitcoin make Bitcoin a reserve currency, the currency that everyone trusts, you have to get central banks actually interested, and they're really not. I don't think that case has been made at all, and it's frankly an odd proposition. They don't care about Bitcoin really much. It's interesting, but it's a worked example of the difference between interesting and actually something they're going to do. Those are very important things to distinguish. Like, I think Bitcoin's absolutely fascinating. Like, I think it's a bad idea, but I've been around it for years because it continues to be fascinating. But that's not the same as feasible or useful or a good idea. It's not really useful as currency. It's not really useful for it. It's failed basically as the consumer use case has more or less failed. There's a small merchant use case. There's a small remittances use case, but they're not very big and they're not going to get bigger. So there's no reason for people to use this stuff. Why would they use this when they could use the currency of something socially stable? At the moment, the approximation for that is the US dollar. The euro is jockeying for the position, that sort of thing. We have wild cards being thrown in, like Facebook's Libra plan. Now, Libra is really dumb in about 100 different ways. They really didn't think this through at all. You know, they waited until last moment to take this financial product to the financial regulators who could kill it dead. And said regulators are not happy. Mostly not because it's some sort of independent money, although it's partly that, but because it's an independent money being done by Facebook, who none of them trust. So central banks are talking about doing a central bank digital currency in case someone competent brings forward the Libra idea. But some of them are giving the game away, like the Chilean official who said, of course, the CBDC doesn't have to be a blockchain or anything like that. So what they mean is actually it's about the politics of the banking industry. Like, do central banks pull in the functions of the commercial banks, that sort of thing. The point is that Bitcoin has presented no reason for any of these people to be interested in it. Why should governments be interested in it? Why should the central banks be interested in it? It's not going to work well enough as a currency to be a threat to them, much as the story as it tells itself. They're worried about things like Libra or a hypothetical competent version of Libra, a private currency that is done by a corporation, which then takes on part of the roles of a state, and how to work against that. Bitcoin is not anywhere in this equation. So basically, my objection to the idea of Bitcoin as a reserve currency is there's no reason prima facie to think this is ever going to happen. And I don't think the reasons that are being put forward really hold.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. But, you know, what do you say about countries such as China or Russia who have a distinct interest in displacing the US dollar as the world's reserve currency currently? Yes, they might be more interested in replacing it with their own currency, but that might not be feasible. Do you think that Bitcoin, or maybe another digital asset, but really Bitcoin, will potentially be pushed by these countries eventually, as they might see it as the most viable competitive alternative to the US dollar as the world's reserve currency?
I think that that's a proposition that normal people would consider so bizarre that you need to do more than just make the proposition. So the answer is no. Why would you think that in terms that non-Bitcoiners would recognize? That is, without any crypto jargon, without any of those assumptions, people who follow conventional, why would people who follow conventional liberal economics entertain this for a moment? That sort of thing. Even conventional neoliberal economics, it doesn't even fit into that.
Yeah, Vortex, what do you think about that? Do you think that countries such as
Hayek wouldn't go for this stuff at all.
Do you think that countries that want to see the displacement of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, do you think they might be interested in pushing, start acquiring and pushing for Bitcoin to be the world's reserve currency, as they see it as a viable way to compete with the US dollar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to understand that a lot of this stuff isn't crypto jargon. So maybe we can throw some actual figures out there. The current system is freaking dying. We have more than $17 trillion of negative yielding bonds. We have more than $22 trillion of debt just in the United States. Today, central banks manipulate the money, which has negative consequences of having a huge disconnect between the money supply and the demand for money. We have rising inflation. We have trade wars. We have endless real wars. We have deplatforming of entire countries off the SWIFT network. You're talking about incentives. Yes, there's absolutely a lot of incentive. The ECB just recently started doing their QE. I mean, we have Argentina imposing capital controls. We have liquidity crisis in the overnight repo markets. I think that the writing is on the wall that the current financial system is crumbling and has very, very large problems. And we are likely due for another recession very, very soon. Now, just a couple of points here of how, Bitcoin, again, well, let's throw away the crypto jargon and get into some more facts here. Again, we have Bitcoin have a market cap of over $100 billion and growing. It is already the 30th largest currency measured by market cap. We have 24/7 global markets, billions in daily trading volume, new financial instruments on the way like ETFs. We have the highest security. It's going to have a higher stock to flow ratio than gold by 2024. It has the highest Sharpe ratio and the best performing asset, guys. Again, 8 of the last 10 years. We have hodl waves that continue to get created and grow larger. We have on-chain data supporting more and more Bitcoin addresses. More and more addresses hold more Bitcoin. We have Bitcoin's rock solid monetary policy. These are very large incentives. These are very, very important incentives for governments and for countries that want to get a leg up on the US dollar, because the US dollar, again, the hegemony has been used for terrible and nefarious purposes for decades. And again, in a world where we're all connected to the internet, it makes total sense to have a non-sovereign internet-based money as a reserve currency. Bitcoin is a medium of exchange, store of value, and unit of account. It is fungible, durable, divisible, portable, accepted globally, limited in supply, and uniform. So, this is something that's going to happen. Countries like Iran and Argentina, Cuba, they're already using Bitcoin to thwart U.S. sanctions. So, at this point, really, Bitcoin is the best decentralized alternative to central banking, and it does not and will not ask for central banking's permission.
Wow, that's a fascinating counter argument. That two diametrically opposed views right here. You're basically saying that it doesn't matter what the central banks do. They're not the ones who get to decide what the world reserve currency is. It's the people that get to decide the world currency. While
Absolutely.
David's basically saying that the central banks are the ones that have to acquire the currency in order for it to be considered a reserve currency. It's held in reserves at the banks. So, it's a really interesting idea. Let's get into it a little bit more. If we move into a system where the world reserve currency isn't decided by the leading central bank, how does that work? Does that mean that everyone holds a sizable amount of savings in Bitcoin? Like, walk me through what your vision of that is and how you guys see that world being or not developing.
Who's first? Sorry.
Yeah, let's go. Let's start with you because we start with David.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So I would like to, make a statement that this is going to play out over decades, right? I say this all the time on my show that this is really, really early days, guys. This is, again, the first 10 years. This is the experiment. The second 10 years is where Bitcoin enters the global stage and really starts being held by governments and other central banks. So it's very, very, very early days right now. So I just want to preface that. But this is going to play out over decades, and it makes absolute sense, again, that Bitcoin can become this world currency if the people want it to be, because at the end of the day, it is the people that control the value. Yes, we have the centralized global financial system strangleholding us, but again, the people can choose a different way. And for the first time, guys, in a millennia or more, we have a choice. We have an actual choice to opt out of the current financial system that they think is better for us. Again, we have a few people on a committee twiddling little dials like interest rates and so forth for the entire country and then for the entire planet. What sense does that make? So to me, that makes zero sense. So you're talking about, what are the incentives for people to learn about this and more? This again is the world's first decentralized, open, borderless, censorship-resistant form of money that we've ever seen.
Gotcha. Very interesting. What do you think, David?
So what was the actual question you asked to start that segment off?
I was rehashing how essentially, Vortex believes that the world's reserve currency can be determined by the populace, that it's more of a, let's call it a masses sort of determination, right? So for that sort of scenario to happen and to play out, all of a sudden, what does that look like? Right now, the world's reserve currency, the US dollar is considered the world's reserve currency. These numbers aren't exactly right, but roughly, a third of all reserves around the world are held in US dollars. So if we move to a system that that's not how we determine the world's reserve currency, what does that look like? Do the masses need to hold 20% of all their wealth in Bitcoin for it to be now considered the world reserve currency? And if so, is there a path to get there, or is there no chance of that ever happening in the near future, even 10 years?
I think you'd have to actually show that path step by step, because at the moment people really aren't very interested in Bitcoin, mass people. It doesn't have a consumer use case. You have to also think about it, the economics of it, where you can say, oh my God, the debt is this many $1 trillion, but numbers like that are always calculated by as percentage of GDP. Anyone who tells you those numbers in dollars or makes a graph of, oh, look at this number go up in dollars, and doesn't do it per GDP is not giving you the actual argument that works. National debt has gone down, it's gone up in the last year or two, that sort of thing. In terms of making Bitcoin or something like that the currency that everyday people use for stuff, we need to work out whether that economy will work. What will stop people essentially running a credit layer on top of Bitcoin, the way they did on top of gold when it started with banknotes, and the economy rapidly moved to the pieces of paper. This started back in the Florentine merchants, the trading in northern Italy, where they had letters of credit and bills of lading. They certainly didn't shuffle gold coins between each other, that sort of thing. Credit's a very simple idea, and it starts early and gets moving. We're seeing it literally in Bitcoin right now. There's billions of dollars of trades in Bitcoin a day, and 90% of those are tethers. And tethers are supposedly backed by dollars, but it turns out that they admitted in court, well, it's only 74% backed, if you can believe that number, that sort of thing. It's the biggest systemic risk in the Bitcoin trading economy. And everyone is sort of saying, it'll be fine, waiting, hoping the music doesn't stop while they're holding. But so you've got this idea of dollars that are tethers that are backed by nothing that anyone can ascertain, and that certainly can't be changed back to actual dollars, that people are sort of trading with. It's credit as money. What is money is much more than just the base backing store. It's also all the credit denominated in that money. This is how money is literally created. It's by commercial banks making loans. That's where money actually comes from in practice. So a world where people use Bitcoin or something like Bitcoin. We have an example in the modern world now. Gold is quite popular in India still, like as money. It's really not used as money much in, say, Britain or the US or Europe, but it really, really is in India. Typically, when people don't have good access to the banking system, they'll be their own bank with gold. Those people, certainly it's harder now because the Indian government's very much against cryptocurrencies. There was a huge Ponzi scheme and they went, right, we'll deal with this, we'll ban it, which was a bit drastic. Maybe they'll loosen up at some point. But even before then, Bitcoin has completely failed to make their pitch to these people. If Bitcoin can work as gold like that, where was the Bitcoin people in India? Why wasn't it taken up by literally the sort of user base for digital gold? That sort of thing. Now, the Indians who use gold, that's actually a real problem. The reason it's a problem is because they hoard their money, or hodl it in Bitcoin parlance. They hoard their money. And when you're hoarding your money, you're just keeping it in a great big pile. It's not doing anything. It's not being active money that's used in the economy. If you put money into an investment, then it's moving, it's doing things, it's increasing the economic wealth, because economics is not about piles of money, it's about flows of money. People don't care about, I have a $100 bill here. No, they care about, I am paid X thousand dollars a year. They care about the flows. An overheated economy has too many flows and things are going too fast, and you need to slow it down. A depressed economy has not enough flows. It's all about the flows, not the amounts. This, by the way, is why Bitcoin, the best performing asset, makes it an absolute disaster as money. That makes it a massive failure to be money. Those are opposite goals, because if your money is deflating, that means people hoard. Economic activity stops. Deflation is a failure. It means your economy jams up. You really don't want the money deflating. If it deflates, everything stops as people hold on to their cash because it'll be worth more tomorrow. That's a characteristic of an investment, not a characteristic of your currency. And currency is meant to flow. So things are a little more stable when you have management of a fiat currency. You have booms and busts, but they're nothing like the ones we had before we went off the gold standard. As I said before, we'd have 2008 level recessions every 5 to 10 years, literally that bad. That's not something that makes people happy and willing to assume prosperity over decades and plan decades ahead and so on. So the present financial system, we can't say what shape it'll take. We may well be due for a shake-up, but we have to see what the shape of that might be. But you can't just say, current system sucks, therefore my favorite thing will definitely take over. That's somewhat motivated reasoning. You actually have to show all the steps and how they work in terms of the existing system and so on. Like, why are people going to take to Bitcoin? Maybe it's a good investment. Maybe that they will think it's a good investment, although they tend not to be really interested at all. We've had huge price rises during this year, but they all seem to be tether manipulation to burn margin traders on BitMEX, that sort of thing. There's no evidence of retail interest. There's no retail sort of trade. So I can't see it happening, but if it did happen, the economy would slow right down and we'd effectively have a depression. It wouldn't be good. And then to get the money flowing, some sort of credit-based money would arise, and that would multiply the money supply. It would flow faster, and we'd do the gold standard again, where you leave the millstone of layer 1 because layer 2 is where the action is.
Yeah. So, I got another question, basically building right off of what you just talked about. We know the U.S. government doesn't like any sort of currency or any other asset competing with the dollar as a world reserve.
They're
currency,
very big,
right? See that in the 1930s when FDR outlawed gold. You see it in the fact that basically in 1971, Nixon moved us essentially being pegged to any sort of gold standard. There's been distinct policy actions and executive actions over time in the United States that have shown, hey, if there's any sort of potential threat of a competition to the US dollar as the world's reserve currency or as a predominant currency, we're going to step in and intervene. So let's start with you, Vortex, because this is more of a pressing question directly from your point of view. If Bitcoin gets to a large enough size, do you believe that the US government will step in to try to prevent it from being a world reserve currency?
Sure. So I think that at this point, really, we're kind of past that. They can certainly implement controls, but at this point, we are past the point of no return. Bitcoin is out there. The Pandora's box has been open, and again, Bitcoin is open, borderless, decentralized, and censorship resistant. So there really at this point is no stopping it, and they know it. And so they're already trying to bring about, as David mentioned, thinking about central banking currencies, central banking blockchains, national blockchains, things like that. But remember, all of that is going to when it goes up against gold is going to be like pretty much like plastic beads going up against a solid gold brick bar. So I'd like to also maybe put out a few counter points to what David said. So first of all, Tether for sure is not a systemic risk to Bitcoin. It has absolutely nothing to do with Bitcoin. It is a centralized company and a temporary solution in order to for exchanges to gain liquidity. So if Tether, the centralized company, goes away, Bitcoin of course will be here for the foreseeable future. And I'd like to again point out it is very, very early days. So and remember, you can't hodl forever. David was talking about everybody's hodling. Of course, not everybody's hodling. There again is billions of dollars of Bitcoin traded per day, so across the planet. So but it is important to hodl, to use some of your wealth, to use yesterday's wealth to build tomorrow's future. That is how the wealthy stay wealthy, and that is how it's been done for centuries. Not like this fiat paycheck to paycheck type of stuff. So that's really important to remember. I think I also want to really state a couple of important intrinsic values for Bitcoin, because a lot of people, a lot of gold bugs like to say, oh, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, right? But really at this point, the big intrinsic value for Bitcoin is a couple things. It's this public ledger, this public state that the entire planet can agree upon every 10 minutes. That is unprecedented to be able to have that as a feature, to be able to use that. The second, of course, is the censorship resistance brought forth through its decentralization. That's a big one, guys. That is going to be very, very important. As we just saw some of the articles about how people over there in other countries getting caught with gold get beheaded the next day. So, it's very, very important for billions of people around the world to be able to have this censorship resistant asset. And the other property is that it's unconfiscatable. This is very important. It cannot be frozen or stolen by any central bank, by any government, by any central actor. That is absolutely super, 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 super important. Sorry,
but it can't be made illegal, right?
Absolutely, it absolutely can be made illegal. And again, my point is that really it's a little bit too far at that point. We have the financialization of Bitcoin network effect happening right now. We have the money managers using this as an uncorrelated asset. We have new financial instruments coming up in Chicago and New York. This is not, and eventually the rest of the world. So again, we are way past that. Remember, China tried to ban Bitcoin and the price doubled. So, it's not going to really happen that way. And again, Bitcoin is this, it's not, David likes to talk a lot about it as a currency, but remember, how the current world works is it uses different specifications for money supply, right? So we have the M0, which is the high powered, right, base money. This is what Bitcoin is at layer 1. This is what Bitcoin is. This is a base money that competes with the dollar and gold. It doesn't compete with cryptocurrencies, and it certainly, doesn't compete with payment networks like Visa. Then you have, of course, M1, M2, M3, and these are all different layers of the financial system that is broken down to, because you cannot scale global networks without putting things into layer. And Bitcoin is no different. We have layer 1 as this base money, this final settlement system. And then we have layers above that we can do instant and private payments with the Lightning Network. So, and the Lightning Network continues, to baffle everybody about how fast it continues to grow. So this is really, really important to understand that layer 1 is not a currency. Layer 1 is that settlement system, and layer 2 and above is what competes with altcoins and payment systems like Visa and PayPal. And again, it's important to remember that even at layer 1, Bitcoin is scaling. It is already faster than most settlement systems. But with the activation of SegWit, we now have more transactions on the network than ever with cheaper fees. Because of the companies are batching, and we have SegWit, the technology, working. So this is really important. We are consistently mining blocks over 1 megabyte and eventually over 2 megabyte. And thanks to Jack Mallers and his Zap wallet, we actually have on and off ramps from fiat to Lightning. So it's really quick, really important. My final point is that this stuff really moves fast, because you suddenly you blink and there's tens of thousands of Lightning Network channels. Then you blink again, and then there's wallets like Jack's, so easy to use that it looks like PayPal. And then you blink again, and we've got Lightning Network powered on and off fiat ramps. So, again, this stuff moves fast, and there is an incentive because people want something different. When your hands are tied behind your back and somebody says you can't do anything, what do you think you're going to try to do? You're going to try to escape. You're going to try to do something better. You're going to try to get away. And this is what Bitcoin represents, is this money, this financial system outside the power of the state.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there. I tend to agree with you there. But I think that there's some distinct risk, especially on what we discussed earlier. David, do you have any thoughts directly responding to what Vortex just mentioned?
Well, yeah. M0 is not actually the base layer reserve. It's actually ready cash. M1 includes bank accounts, although these days money comes directly from bank accounts. M0 and M1 is a tricky concept, but yeah. Lightning Network is not gaining in popularity. The Block published a great article documenting all the numbers on this just recently. Transactions are way down, channels are way down. 40% of liquidity is literally one guy who's running the network for free because he believes it and wants to push it and go, which is fine. It's an experimental network, but it's factually incorrect to say that it's gaining massively in popularity, because literally it isn't. But in terms of what was the original question that was launching off?
What was the original question? I was just asking you to respond to what Vortex had just mentioned.
Yeah, it's so I don't buy that Tether is not part of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not just blockchain and some software to manipulate blockchain. Bitcoin is a system. It's a system made of people. It's made of all sorts of layers of interacting stuff. You can say some stuff's further away than other stuff and so on. It's all one system. Tether is part of that system. Arguably, all of the cryptos are, with Bitcoin as the biggest one. It's a system. It's not, you can't just isolate parts and say, yeah, the bit I like is Bitcoin, the bit I don't like is not Bitcoin. I don't buy that at all. It's certainly, you're correct that Bitcoin will be around for decades. I expect there will be something in 3 or 4 decades that will be descended from the current Bitcoin software and the current Bitcoin blockchain. The question is how much interesting that is and how much it interacts with the rest of the world. As we've said, price has gone up hugely this year because it was pumped with tethers so that they could burn margin traders on BitMEX. There's no evidence of retail interest. The evidence you'd expect to see if there was retail evidence isn't there. Trading levels are way down on all the exchanges. Coinbase is desperately adding all the minor altcoins it possibly can to try to drive some trading volumes up, that sort of thing. You can say this is only early days and lots of stuff will definitely happen in the future, but you're making the claim. You need to show how to not just look, point Z is possible because we're at point A. You have to first show we're at point A and show points B, C, D, E, F in a really convincing manner. I mean, I'd like to consider the possibility that this is not early days for Bitcoin. This is actually late days for Bitcoin. What if that were the case? What if this had been blown and people weren't that interested anymore and the people burnt, the retail investors who got burnt in 2017 don't come back? What if that was the case? How would you distinguish that from what we see now? That sort of thing. It's just saying that you can't prove it won't happen the way that I'd really, really like it to. It's true I can't, but that's not a strong argument that's convincing if someone doesn't already agree with you.
Awesome. Thank you.
But exciting possibilities are one thing, and they're great. But that's different to showing that all of this actually follows.
Yeah, 100%. And also, I think another interesting thing is, Lightning has been gaining a lot of hype and interest, and it's great to see so many channels open. But if you even look at both Lightning and SegWit adoption last time I checked was below 60%. So even though SegWit's been out as a technical update for well over a year now, it just hasn't necessarily been adopted at that great of a rate. So I think all these points are really good, and I know Vortex, you're itching to directly respond, but I really want to take it to the community questions at this point in time. We have some amazing community members at True Story. Some of the most intelligent discussions, just like we're having right now, are happening right on the True Story platform. So I really encourage everyone, if people are enjoying this and think they want to have these sorts of discussions, this is what we do on True Story all day, every day. So would love for you to join and continue the discussion there. But one of our most prominent and one of the people that I respect the most accounts is, his name is Woofy Packy. And he said one of the things he brings out is, even if Bitcoin can overtake gold, which that David brings up as has been a world reserve currency, is a respected store of value today, will a better Bitcoin ever be able to overtake Bitcoin? So even if Bitcoin potentially gets close to becoming a world reserve currency, since we essentially let something completely artificially created take over and become the world reserve currency, what's to prevent it from happening again and again and again? And then doesn't it defeat the entire idea of what a reserve currency is at that point?
Sure. Sorry, who's going to go?
With Vortex,
well, actually,
because you
go first.
Itching to talk.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, so that's a great question, and it's a very plausible question, and so I think I want to answer with this most important point. Bitcoin is not a website. It's not an application. It's not a social network. It's not an app on your phone. It's not something that can be replaced so easily. It is a protocol, and protocols have network effects. And in fact, Bitcoin's network effects are at this point insurmountable for any other technology, to the point to where literally nothing else can even try to be created to compete with Bitcoin, because nobody actually wants to build that. Nobody wants to build a thing where they make no money in the beginning and and they give it out to the world. That's what makes Bitcoin really, really special, is its immaculate conception. The fact that it was created and donated to the world with no profit and given away in open source. We've simply seen nothing else do that wants to be a new money like Bitcoin does. In fact, we've seen networks go other directions, like Ethereum try to create smart contracts, or other networks try to do other specific things like Monero with privacy and rigging signatures. So we've seen other chains take other paths, and that's fine. But literally nobody and nothing can compete with Bitcoin at this point, and nobody and nothing has even attempted to compete with Bitcoin at this point. So that's probably how I would answer that.
Gotcha. Very cool. Very good. What do you think, David?
So, on the hypothesis that Bitcoin does become a really, really popular currency, I think Vortex is actually right on this one, because Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency and it'll be the last one. I don't buy Bitcoin maximalism completely, because the actual markets we see, both the trading market and the payments market, such as they are completely coin agnostic, right? They don't care about Bitcoin. They don't care about the ideology at all. Markets do not care about your ideology. That's a really important lesson to keep in mind. Real markets that exist, they only care about number go up. So they will trade decentralized coins, Bitcoin and Ether. They'll trade tokens like Ripple, centralized tokens. They'll trade completely centralized ICO tokens. All of these sort of assets are traded in the same venues on the same purposes, or used for payments or whatever. In the dark nets, when Bitcoin's transaction fees were going through the roof, they happily hopped to Ether or Monero because Bitcoin was slow and expensive. So they used whatever got the money moved. They had the thing they wanted to do. They didn't care about the ideology either. However, Bitcoin is still the biggest. Ether is changeable for dollars, but the other altcoins are basically priced in Bitcoin or in Ether. I can't see something really replacing Bitcoin on that score. If Ethereum ever manages to do its proof of stake transition, which has been coming for 6 months for the last 5 years. And no, I don't want to put them down, because they're trying to do some serious work here. They're nice techie guys. They're pretty cool. What they're doing is interesting. But they haven't succeeded. I will say they've succeeded when they've actually got it released and it's stood up to the hostile world. If they manage that transition, maybe they could be a super popular currency. I won't say it's impossible, but I'll say they did it when they've actually done it. But yeah, basically, I think that Bitcoin is the biggest one, and it's going to stay that way, given what we now know for the foreseeable future.
Gotcha. Yeah, looking at your shirt, I totally would have thought you'd be a huge ETH head, with all the purple animals. You gotta love it, right? So the next question.
This is the squid of Goldman Sachs.
The next question is from Desh Saraba, and he's really interested in knowing what role the education about how Bitcoin works will play for central bankers around the world to decide to adopt Bitcoin.
So I'll take this one first, because I've been looking at this one a lot, because what I've been following lately is Libra, which is, in the mainstream world, Libra is the only story there is related to cryptocurrency, right? Mm. And it's more related to cryptocurrency than a lot of people might think, because David Marcus is a huge Bitcoiner. He has been since 2012. He's a true believer. He was on the board of Coinbase for a while, that sort of thing. And if you read the Libra white papers, they are full of Bitcoin ideas. Libra I would characterize it as, Bitcoin would be good if it was run by sensible people, meaning us, which this has a number of problems, obviously. So the thing is that Libra, there's a myth in Bitcoin that as soon as governments knew what Bitcoin was, they would definitely squash it with their status jackboot. That's not how anything works. What we actually saw was how they always react to new financial innovations. They say, looks interesting. Let's see how it plays out. Don't break any laws. Whoops, that's an illegal Ponzi. You can't do that. Whoops, that's an unregistered security. Please don't do that. No, really, please don't do that. We've just fined you $24 million, that sort of thing. Basically, the regulators sort of keep the wheels on capitalism because, completely untrammeled free markets collapse in a series of fairly predictable ways, and efficient markets always need a bit of management so they don't go into one of the collapse modes, which is why we have regulators. The job of the regulator is to keep the wheels on capitalism, pretty much. So with central banks, what they're trying to do is keep the wheels on. They look at something like Libra and they think, these guys are idiots, and that's fine, but they're idiots with a great big company with billions of users, and they could really do some damage. We'd better pay attention to this one. So they're worried about Facebook, not because of the thing they're doing or the technology. They don't give a hoot about the technology. They care about the company, what it's planning, what their competence is, whether they can do this in a way that doesn't trash the system. Because, literally their job is to keep the system more or less stable. This is why they were talking in terms of central bank digital currencies, which may or may not be even blockchain. As far as I can tell, central bankers are the sort of people who say, I hate cryptocurrencies, but I love the blockchain, which, as any techie knows, translates to, I have no idea about technology, but I've read a lot of white papers. Blockchain has no use cases, but they will, its only use case is cryptocurrency, and I'm not a big fan of that one, but it is a use case. So this is why, as I had mentioned, the Chilean official at the meeting of central bankers, where we were talking about central bank digital currencies, said, oh, it wouldn't necessarily be on a blockchain. So, the blockchain isn't needed for this. It's just a sort of marketing point, which is the best use for blockchains, really. So they're thinking about this sort of thing a lot. In terms of education, none of these people know how a blockchain works. None of them know how Bitcoin works. They know more or less stuff about it, but what they know about it tends to be, this money is used for money laundering and by bad people who we don't like. And they're not very fond of stuff being out of control because it's so hard to keep the wheels on. It's very hard work doing serious macroeconomics when people actually give you trouble for what you do. So they are interested in it and they keep an eye on it, but they would need an actual reason to adopt it or worry about it. If a whole lot of citizens took on Bitcoin as a currency that they used a lot, they'd start thinking hard about it. But I think that's vanishingly unlikely. So first, they need a reason to look into it as deeply as Bitcoin fans might like them to.
Awesome.
I can answer that as well. Yeah, sure. So yeah, there's a lot of great points in there, and it's funny because I think that me and David probably, just like Rubini and right, and just like some Peter Schiff, we all agree on like 99.9999%.
Totally.
It's just that last part with Bitcoin and Lightning that we can't seem to agree on. But yeah, no, it's a lot of great points in there. I guess I want to bring up that to me, when I look at the halvings, when I look at Bitcoin and its liquidity and its value and its growing through the halvings every 4 years, to me, it's just an inevitability that central banks and governments will be forced to hold this asset in the next few years. Again, it is the best performing asset. There is nothing else that is capped like Bitcoin is. And the people will eventually, the market will eventually continue to gravitate. I mean, they have gravitated toward it because it's grown hundreds and thousands of percents since Davis first heard about it when it was a few dollars back then, but it will continue to grow. That's not actually going to stop or slow down. These cycles continue, and we have mathematical charts that we can actually put on-chain data through, like the stock to flow ratio, right? Like things that we can actually point to where Bitcoin's value may be. For example, the fair value today, according to that ratio, is around 8,250, and after the next halving, somewhere like $30,000-$40,000 plus dollars. And that's again just the beginning, because this is very, very early days. And the hypotheticals of it maybe not being early days doesn't really compute to me when I look at things to compare it with, like the internet and like the World Wide Web and like other networks like mobile itself, right? Like the internet, like televisions, and on and on and on. We see the same repeat, the same cycles repeat, which is, it goes nowhere, nobody cares about it, and then it has that hockey stick uptake where there's finally enough utility for the mainstream to be able to grab on. Because guys, look, the internet existed for decades before the World Wide Web came along. Sometimes things can exist for a while in a small group, and then again reach that tipping point of utility, and then everybody will pick it up. So to me, it is an inevitability as Bitcoin continues to its dominance on the world, essentially sucking up all the value. Bitcoin only knows how to do one thing, and that's eat fiat value over and over again until there's nothing left. So in my opinion, as the people, as the companies, as the governments start holding this, central banks will obviously have to hold it. And again, just to repeat, I'm not saying that, Bitcoin will become the world reserve currency tomorrow and that central banks will be holding it tomorrow. I'm saying this is an inevitability, and this plays out over decades, and this will happen eventually. And my personal, projections again are all around the halvings. So I definitely predict governments and central banks to begin holding this asset as early as 2024.
Well, I think that's a great way to end it. Very positive outlook, very positive note. Thank you both so much. So once again, it's David Gerard. You can find him at David Gerard on Twitter, and Vortex at the one Vortex on Twitter. My name is Madison, here from True Story. If you really enjoyed this conversation, want to continue to have these sorts of conversations online, as I said before, we have them every day, all day on the True Story application. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the debate and that you found it insightful. Our goal with these debates is to bring experts from both sides of any issue so we can critically think about the issue, understand both sides, and make progress. To that end, if there's anything that we can do to make these debates better for you, please let us know in the chat below. Until then, I hope you'll join us on beta.truestory.io. Stop yelling, start debating, only on True Story.